Well, more cold open content for me.
I quit.
Everything just kind of has a dark edge.
I think we're going to need to just reschedule at this point, guys. Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, and despite all my rage, I'm just another blonde in the bleachers.
I'm co-host Jeremy, and aside from also being a blonde in the bleachers next to my brother Sean, I thought I'd start a little a gentleman's group. Like, really kind of help dudes bond in like a healthier way, maybe through farming on the prairie. I'm going to call it Gentlemen of the Prairie.
Oh, I see. It's a play on Ladies of the Canyon. What is that album called?
Ladies of the Canyon.
It was just such a long way to get there.
But now that we've all explained it, it's really good.
Yeah, that joke landed well.
It did. I mean, I got it. I did get it, Jeremy.
Did you feel humor in you after getting it?
It was a little chuckle.
Did you recognize the humorous elements of the words that he spoke?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I appreciated that it wasn't even the album we're here to talk about today. But it was at least the right artist. I am co-host Peter Cook, and I wanted to apologize to our listeners for lying to them at the beginning of season 4.
Oh.
We named off all kinds of albums from 1972 because we began the season by featuring some albums from 1972. We named off a whole bunch of albums released that year and said we weren't going to be talking about any of those. But one of those albums we mentioned was Joni Mitchell, For the Roses. And
here we are.
Here we are today. I guess we're just doing an extension of our 1972 season 4 opening.
Yeah. Thanks, guest host Bob Bucko, for turning us into liars.
It's a good year.
Welcome back, Bob.
Oh, it's good to be back.
It's good to be back, and it's good to be king. You are the guest on our #1 most listened to episode of all time at this point.
Say what?
Yeah, the Isley Brothers. That's our best episode.
Oh, it's a good album.
It's a really good album. Check that episode out if you haven't heard it.
Yeah, you can hear us talk about how good that album is.
You can get twice as much Bob Bucko in your life. Everybody could use a little more Uncle Bobby.
Bob, you want to remind people who you are in case they haven't listened already?
Oh, yeah. That whole thing that I have failed to do every single time I've been on here. I am Bob Bucko Jr., and I make music, and I have a little record label that releases music, and I don't know what else to say.
What is the name of the label?
Oh, Personal Archives?
There we go.
Yeah.
People can now track you down.
Now find that. Hunt it down and send me money.
That was ominous.
I am only on this podcast as part of an elaborate marketing scheme. An MLM, possibly, if y'all want to get involved.
Oh, I'm interested. Yeah, let's talk afterwards.
Okay, I have a brochure I'll show you.
Yeah, cool.
Well, until we do that, what did you bring us to talk about? We already said it, but why don't you introduce the record?
Yeah. The 1972 album by Joni Mitchell, For the Roses.
Which this one comes between Blue and Court and Spark, right?
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of like a lost transitional album in that era of her career. because Blue is forever critically acclaimed, Rolling Stone top 10 style thing.
Yeah, as is Ladies of the Canyon right before that.
Right, yeah. So 70 into 71. And then Court and Spark was incredibly commercially successful, maybe one of her most. And also that's the one that really starts to accentuate the jazzier end of things. And For the Roses really starts to hint at that coming in. Tom Scott's all over the album, and who's probably come up in like 10 episodes, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've talked about Tom Scott a few times.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's also sentimentally kind of a special album to me because my parents didn't have a very large record collection when I was a kid, but they had some weird fucking choices for a really small collection. So like for Neil Young, it was On the Beach. For Todd Rundgren, it was A Wizard, a True Star.
Interesting.
Which you did on the show. The first Emmett Rhodes album, which is on the show.
Yeah.
And for Joni, it was this one. It's like, did they only buy out of the 99-cent cutout rack there? Like that bin? Because they're brilliant albums that didn't sell as well as they usually would have by that artist, yeah?
Yeah, turns out your parents were like the originators of this podcast concept.
Proto-podcasters, influencers.
But yeah, so this album is, I've been hearing it since I was a little kid. And I can definitely thank my mom for turning me on to, I probably wouldn't play guitar the way I do without the knowledge of what she was doing with altered tunings on the guitar and things like that. So yeah, just someone who's musically been very inspiring to me. And I think this is kind of an album that's sometimes overlooked.
Well, would we like to start for our listeners? What song will we play first?
The second song on side 1, Cold Blue Steel and Sweet Fire.
Excellent choice. Let's do that.
Cold blue steel out of money, one eye for the people lose. Sweet fire calling, you can't deny me. Now you know what you knew. Underneath the jungle gym, hollow gray fire escape through. Looking for sweet fire, shadow of lady release. Come with me, I know the way. She says it's down, down, down the dark ladder. Do you wanna contact somebody first? Leave someone a letter. You can come now, or you can come later. Just watch her ring down the stairs, screamer. Edgy black cracks of the sky. Pink cushion pick fixes for that dreamer. Morning, cold shadows reply. Pawn shops crisscrossed and padlocked. Corridors spit on prayers and pleas. Sparks fly up from the sweet fire. Black suit of lady release. Come with me, I know the way. She says it's down, down, down the dark ladder. Do you wanna contact somebody first? Does it really matter if you come now or if you come later?
The song starts off with this kind of feel with, the tuned down to C acoustic guitar, rhythmically played, kind of, okay, it's a folk song, right? And then partway through, when all of a sudden you have the soprano sax and a synth kind of come in, do a little squiggle, and this choir of voices comes out, and Tom Scott's just kind of doing this like just haunting soprano. Sounds like it's being played like in a hallway, kind of conjuring the elements of the song lyrically, which are, this is like one of just the most cruelly honest songs about drug use like that's ever been made.
Specifically, James Taylor's drug use.
Yeah,
Just like John Denver, James fucking Taylor, like these squeaky clean image, you know. It blows the mind. It blows the mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it was his heroin addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. And she was, you know, very baldly describing like how horrible that is for a person. And also coming at it like a lot of this album does, coming at these things, rock and roll, drug abuse, stuff like that, but through a woman's lens and their experiences, which aren't exactly the same. Like Blonde in the Bleachers, which we'll probably come to later, really hits on this idea. You know, so I don't think, you know, like you have like Lou Reed singing Heroin or something, you know, it's a first person thing. This is like, I'm watching you, you're doing this to yourself and to me. And then it's written so poetically that you can miss 90% of that being said because she's just such a damn good writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a lesser musician would have just turned it into like a PSA that drugs are bad, but instead this is like a really personal.
Yeah, it would have been the Saved by the Bell episode where they smoked weed, you know, like. Yeah, instead you get stuff like red water in the bathroom sink, fever in the scum brown bowl. You know, like it's almost passes you by, but then you realize what's being said there, and it's just haunting. You know, because she lived this, but it doesn't come off confessional the way so many folk writers do, because it is being written through such a like poetic style that it transcends beyond this is a song about me or my life, which is, I guess, the core of all good art, right? So,
Yeah, that was something I noticed in listening to this album, which I've had this album for a few years. It'd been a while since I had listened to it, but I sat down listening to it with headphones on and had the gatefold open, reading the lyrics along to it just to kind of absorb them. And I was surprised at just how poetic they were, even knowing, you know, her renown for songwriting. Actually reading them, listening to her, I was very impressed with how much attention was given to them.
Yeah. Really gifted with imagery.
Yeah, she has a very dense approach to songwriting, I'd say. Like, there's so much packed in, just line after line, and you kind of have to go, like, read the lyrics separately and, like, take your time to process what she's even saying, because there's just so much crammed into this time of a song.
Yeah, I agree completely. And multiple ideas, like there seems to be this parallel thing, and this comes up again on, and I'll probably mispronounce it, but Hejira, a later 70s album of hers, where there's kind of these twin roads of home and family and music and fame. And a lot of the songs on this album, instead of being about one or the other, it's integrating both of these aspects of her life that she can't seem to ever make connect.
Yeah, and I found the name of this album, For the Roses, has a similar quality of, you know, you just let it kind of flow by you and not think about it. But what that meant to her is like when horses like win the race, they like throw the roses at them for like winning the race, which she kind of envisioned as like, you know, after Blue was a big success, you know, the critics are all throwing the roses at her, and the record label's like, wow, you're doing a great job. But then,
the lyrics on that one are a great cut down to the industry for sure.
Yeah, but then when they're done with you, they take you out back and shoot you.
Just like a horse, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and it's interesting because this is her first record with Asylum. So there's a lot riding on this for Geffen, I believe, at the time, right? And so it is a different thing. Like apparently her idea for the album cover, which would have used her own art, was rejected because they wanted her photo on there. You know, they're trying to
Yeah.
sell this product, and she's acutely aware that she's a product and she's being sold. And a lot of that comes out in this music as well. It's weird because it's kind of like the Kinks. It's like these people that are still in their fucking 20s probably, and they're having midlife identity crises already and going into this like nostalgic look back at their youth. It's like, you're still young. But they've achieved so much already that they're like weary about it or something.
I guess the image that she had painted for the album cover was supposed to her, it symbolized a critique or her feelings of the music industry. And I believe that's in what's in the gatefold of the record. That image is on the inside. And I thought that was interesting that then she's told, oh no, you got to put your face on the album cover. Like,
right.
Yeah. I actually didn't know much about Joni Mitchell before this episode. And the more I read about her, the more like kind of perplexing and really interesting character she is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of felt like this story I've seen before of these artists who are like extremely introverted and kind of are like mining sort of the inner psyche for their lyrical content, which then makes people who relate to the music they create feel like intensely personal connection to it. So then you have this, you know, all these fans who feel like so connected to you, but you're just a human being trying to exist in the world, and especially a human being that's not into, you know, being around a bunch of other people. I don't know. It was...
Well, no, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and particularly with the aspect, you know, because there are people that want to be famous, right? And Joni Mitchell always came across, whether it was like visual art or music, as someone who was doing this and doing it on a level that you couldn't ignore. You couldn't ignore it because she didn't know people, or because she was from Canada, or because she was a woman, or whatever other weird 60s Hollywood kind of rubric for getting success would be. It was just the sheer quality of what was going on demanded it. But then you have, like you said, like a person who doesn't want all the other shit that comes with it.
yeah, she's not Lady Gaga where everything's about the fame. Quite the opposite.
And yeah, that's just weird to it's weird to no, it's weird to think about this, someone in that position, because when you're talking that kind of money, you know, the kind of money that Geffen probably threw at her to sign her to this fledgling label, right? Like, wasn't like her and Judy Sill were like the first two people he was working with, I believe.
Correct. Yep.
Like, I could see where that would be really messing with her head already. I don't know. It's like all three of, or, you know, like all four of us that here, we all create, you know, we make music. We don't have any context to see what it's like for somebody like that, though.
Who's at that level.
Like, that's a whole other weird trip. So yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of, I guess I'll leave it at this. This kind of weariness about being famous is still something I'd rather hear than a Bob Seger song about being on tour.
Turn the page, Bob.
It was also pretty interesting. David Geffen in this fledgling label was kind of putting pressure on Joni to create a hit song.
Yeah.
And the song she made for him was called You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio.
And it was a hit.
And it actually is like a catchy song.
Get to like,
yeah.
Yeah, number 25 on Billboard. It's catchy, but it's funny because it shows how out of place it is already in her creative lexicon. Because it's so much more straightforward. It's obviously pandering on some level. It's still a good song and really well written, but you can see that she's walked away from that formula by now.
Yeah, I was 16 or 17 when the Joni Mitchell hits compilation was released, and my mother purchased that and played it all the time in the house. That was my introduction to Joni Mitchell. And I remember even then, like looking at the track listing, and just even by the title, that one seemed to jump out as like a strange song in her repertoire.
I can't think of it off the top of my head, but yeah, there's definitely some great lyrical turns in that about the business end of things.
Yeah.
You know, so she's sneaking it in even to the thing that's supposed to be acquiescing to the demands, you know?
Yeah, it's like self-aware of what it is,
Yeah.
which I find
yeah.
super interesting. But
and it has some wicked harmonica on it.
yeah. But we're not going to play that song.
No.
What song are we going to play next, Bob?
We'll go with the song right after Cold Blue Steel and Sweet Fire, Bar and Grill.
Yeah.
Bar and Grill.
One word, please.
A little side A, track 3.
Three waitresses all wearing black diamond earrings, talking about zombies and Singapore slings. No trouble in their faces, not one anxious voice, none of the crazy you get from too much choice. The thumb and the satchel or the rented Rolls Royce, and you think she knows something by the second refill. You think she's enlightened as she totals your bill. You say, show me the way to Bar and Grill. Well, some say it's in service, they say humble makes pure. You're hoping it's near folly, 'cause you're headed that way for sure. And you just have to laugh, 'cause it's all so crazy. All her mind's on her boyfriend and eggs over easy. It's just a trick on you, her mirror's in your will. So you ask the truck driver on the way to the till, but he's just a slave to Bar and Grill. The guy at the gas pumps, he's got a lot of soul. He sings Merry Christmas for you just like Nat King Cole. And he makes up his own tune right on the spot about white walls and windshields and this job he's got. And you wanna get moving and you wanna stay still, but lost in the moment some longing gets filled, and you even forget to ask.
Yeah, that one is very infectious, yet it kind of gives me this whole album, but that one in particular, maybe some almost like Van Morrison Astro Weeks kind of vibes with that folk into jazz sound.
I mean, it's a little Ren Fair at the beginning, but but yeah, no, that is, yeah, or even like Moondance, because it is pretty, it is more in that pop lexicon on a song, and that's why I feel like this is another, like, kind of more evidence of kind of the transitional nature. Like for this one, the arc of the song, the form of it is more traditional, how she had been writing, but musically what's going into it, the chords, the chord extensions, it's leaning towards this jazz end again, all the different winds that Tom Scott's playing on it. And so it feels like it's kind of this hybrid of what she, eventually becomes, really.
Yeah. I think it's an important transitional record, and it is surprising that this one usually gets priced at, I don't know, $6, $7, $8. A lot of her other stuff is from right around this time is 10, 15, 20, I feel like.
Yeah, it seems like Ladies of the Canyon, like Blue and earlier, all seem like they've gotten really expensive.
Well, that's why we're talking about this one.
And
they
because
can make this fifth record expensive too by the time we're done with it.
There you go. But it is every bit as good. There's no slump here, and I mean, like having to pick 4 songs out of this was really difficult for me.
Yeah, I think you picked like maybe just one that I would have picked, and then
Really nice.
different. So
What's the alternate playlist here?
I would have done Banquet,
Oh yeah,
Cold Blue Steel, and Sweet Fire for sure.
yeah.
Probably See You Sometime.
Ooh, okay.
Or it would have been either that or Judgment of the Moon and Stars, which is probably my favorite one. And then
Yeah, I mean, talk about a way to end an album.
yeah. And
Yeah, I mean, that's putting it all out there.
yeah, You Turned Me On, I'm a Radio. I feel like I would have played just for showing the people that song, but this is your ride, Bob. We're just along.
We're on the Bob Bucko Express here.
Honk, honk. Oh, wait.
Well, yeah. So as far as talking about Joni's story, I mean, this seems like a long story to try to tell.
Yeah, there's no way we get through all of it. I'll mention some of the highlights, but as I learned while doing this research, there's tons of great interviews with Joni, and she's a confounding character that's pretty entertaining to watch interviews of. So I'll give kind of the broad strokes here, so you have, if you don't know at all, you'll have kind of a general idea about Joni.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. She's a figure who people know, but how much do they know about her?
Yeah, and I think people's view of who she is just way out of whack, actually. Once I learned myself that my view is way out of whack. But Joni Mitchell was actually born Roberta Anderson,
Yeah.
and Joni's the nickname, but born November 7th, 1943 in Fort Macleod, Alberta in Canada. But she mostly grew up in Saskatoon and Saskatchewan, which, from my understanding of Canada, is kind of like the Midwest, or kind of out in the sticks.
Yeah, there's not much out there. It's crazy how those areas keep coming up in her songs too. But yeah, it seemed, even to us, just in America, that seems like an alien world, like rural Saskatchewan.
Yeah, it's just one of those fun words to say that you don't even think
No,
is a real place.
Saskatoon. That's the fun one.
They're both fun, Bob.
Now, let's argue this out. I want to hear more of this debate.
Are we going to have to separate you boys?
Yes.
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
So, Joni's growing up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and at age 9 contracts polio. And when I read that at first, I was like, wait, didn't they cure polio? And reading up on it,
Not in Saskatoon.
well, the vaccine came out 3 years later.
Wow.
So she was like, in the last group of people.
And lingering effects of that play a lot into her guitar style, because it was kind of the need to do open tunings to get some of those chord voicings that she couldn't finger in the traditional way because of, like after effects of having had polio.
Yeah, her fretting hand was weakened and never really recovered fully. So that is what...
Yeah, so many things are just like single finger bar chords, just tuned so that she can get away with doing it that way. And as someone who's had like major hand surgery, like that was really inspirational to me to rethink the guitar.
Yeah, it was that sort of forced innovation.
And again, it shows like her tenacity. Like, I'm going to be, it's like, oh, I can hardly do this thing. Well, I'm going to find out a way to do it.
Yeah, like Django Reinhardt style.
Right.
Yeah, as you mentioned, that carried on, and she also would just like have health issues through a lot of the rest of her life. She kind of got in this pattern of like recording an album, going on tour, and then just like being wrecked physically from all that, because that's hard on like any human being, but
Right.
it would catch up with her and she'd have to go through these like long periods of just recovering and getting back to like a baseline. So yeah. She also, I found this very funny watching all these interviews, started smoking at age 9, smoking cigarettes. And
It's very Canadian of her.
yeah, every interview I watched of her, even these like big TV interviews, she's like smoking the whole time during it. And I was like, wow, this lady smokes a lot. And one interview was talking to her biographer who was like, yeah, she smokes like 4 packs a day. And this is in like the mid 2000s. And she also said this, she said smoking is one of life's greatest pleasures, and said it never affected her voice, that was just age that caused it to lower.
I was going to say that's like 2 octaves lower now.
Yeah. So
Well,
that's,
you call them as you see them sometimes, I guess. I don't know.
Let that be a lesson to you kids. Take up smoking at the age of 9 and you can become one of the most celebrated singers of the 20th century.
yeah.
It's too late, though. The 20th century's over.
I'd buy that for $1. Now sponsored by Philip Morris.
Yeah. So she began learning guitar as a teen. As we mentioned, she uses a lot of alternate tunings to, be able to fret all those chords that she does. She started playing folk clubs around age 18 and then moved to Toronto at age 20 to pursue music more professionally. Not as like a got you, but like this turned out to be a pretty important fact of her life. It was at the same time that she found herself unexpectedly pregnant by her ex-boyfriend that was, not, or it might have been ex-husband. It was like not a happy relationship, and she decided to give the child up for adoption. And this was like a secret she carried through a lot of her life and would allude to in songs throughout her career. And then some like old friend of hers like sold the story to the paparazzi in like the 90s. Oof. And created this whole sensation, but then she did end up actually finding her daughter and meeting her from there. But all of this is important because after she gave up her daughter is when she actually started writing music for the first time in her life. And I'm sure played a lot into this sort of like, I don't know, she seems very like shamanistic or sagely for someone of her age, like way advanced.
Yeah, it does feel like there's, even in her early work, there's a whole lifetime of experiences that she's reflecting on.
Yeah, and just like a really earnest sort of like sorrow at times, and like this, just these raw emotional feelings that feel intense for someone that age. Which
I think, I feel like sometimes her work can be so hyper specific, even if it's a little cryptic. I feel like some of that raw emotion, probably based on some really specific experiences, is maybe the reason that not everyone can connect with what she does.
Yeah.
It's powerful, but it's also like kind of unique experiences. So I could see it, there not being an in for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unique experiences. It's presented very uniquely. I'd say when I was younger, I was like, yeah, these songs are brilliant. I just like don't really like her voice. But I've gotten over pretty much everyone's voice at this point in my life. But like she sings in this way that's really unique, jumpy, and like has a lot of like, I presume it's like a jazz influence that drives a lot of these, like she kind of has these big jumps. It's not really fluid melodies a lot.
Yeah, her delivery can be kind of like a beatnik at times.
Yeah.
Just the sort of that rambly, rhythmic way of delivering her poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more syncopated than like a traditional 60s folky for sure.
Yes. And I haven't really, I can't say off the top of my head that I've heard too many vocalists who I feel are directly inspired by her. I feel like it would be a hard thing to emulate.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like she's trying to sound like a horn anyway. I feel like, most of her singing sounds very much like a saxophone to me.
Huh. I guess I've never thought of it that way. That's interesting.
I really hear it in that kind of context, especially with like when she chooses to use vibrato and some of the kind of glissando stuff she does with her vocal, like you were mentioning, these kind of little leaps and stuff. And the vocal, I feel like she's always regarding it more as like an instrument than a voice,
I suppose Ani DeFranco might take a little inspiration from her.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of dynamic range, and I can see that in both of them, where that's very important to the delivery, especially when and again, this applies to both those artists, especially when you have a ton of freaking words.
Yeah.
The delivery is going to be really important, and like you said, how much she's packing in to this relatively narrow space, both in terms of like words themselves and the meanings involved. So yeah, the delivery is kind of paramount for like what you're able to pull out on a listen, as opposed to, like you said, when you're sitting there reading the lyrics on your 25th listen.
Yeah, I definitely recommend reading along to the lyrics. It definitely made me notice things that I hadn't before.
Yeah, definitely. Well, are we ready to listen to another song?
Yeah, we could listen to another song.
Okay, because that kind of segued into my thoughts, like the lyrics on "Let the Wind Carry Me," which I think it's track 5 on side A.
Correct.
Yes. Great. Just thinking about, it kind of touches on a lot of biographical stuff in the lyrics, which she does, as we were talking about, quite a bit. And it's kind of looking back on family and her parents and these different roles they're playing in her life. But then it also like focuses on present time, which is, like there's a line like, I want to raise a child with somebody. And then, but like the song ends with, I'm a wild seed, let the wind take me, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing because I'm not a brilliant writer who wrote the damn song. And it's this kind of like melancholy and this wistfulness that there's this thing I could have done. I could have been like my mom. And maybe that's okay mixed with this, but this is who I am. And I have to suffer not having those things for what I'm doing, what I'm creating. So you have that going on at the same time as all the commercial stuff we were talking about earlier with the record labels and everything. And, it just, continues to contribute to kind of the complexity of what she's exploring on this album, which is also written, as we kind of touched on earlier, while she's dating James Taylor, before he's super famous, and while he's a terrible junkie.
Yeah.
So, like, there is so much going on, to process. And I guess this is how she's processing, right? Is in songs, just like you were saying, starting to write music after giving up her child. It's like this is always going to be the way to kind of explore and get it out and understand it, apparently.
Very true. Well, let's hear the song.
Oh, yeah.
Let the Wind Carry Me. Side A, track 5.
Papa's faith is people, Mama, she believes in cleaning. Papa's faith is in people, like my eyelids painted green. She don't like me staying up late in my high-heeled shoes, living for that rock and roll dancing scene. Papa says leave the girl alone, mother. She's looking like a movie queen.
Yeah, I really like the piano on that track. Well, the piano on this album.
It's all her, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it reminds me a little of like Neil Young, but it's like jazzier and more complex and interesting. And yeah.
Well, I like how the piano is so the core of the song, and it is kind of so it's simultaneously like really sparse like that, but then you have these kind of choral vocals going on.
Yeah, those
which,
are cool. And
you know, and again, I guess it kind of speaks to that idea of her approaching her voice more instrumentally. You know, it's kind of like they couldn't get the Brecker brothers in that day, so she decided to multi-track real quick. Yeah, the piano is amazing on this album. You're right. It's things that are like easy to kind of lose track of and ignore unless you're really focusing on it. And this song really allows you to hear what's going on in that piano line, you know?
Yeah, I'd say it's very much a headphone album, like a late night headphone album.
yeah,
For sure.
let's get the last of the bio we're going to cover here because there's too much. In 1965, she follows Chuck Mitchell, who she got married to, from Toronto to Detroit, Michigan, where Chuck's from, and this is where Joni got the last name Mitchell as well.
Uh-huh.
They were married for a couple years, got divorced, but she kept the name Mitchell, and then...
Sounds better than Joni Anderson.
It does. So she moved...
No offense to any Joni Andersons in our audience.
She then moves from Detroit to New York to really, get at the core of American folk music, and is really only there pretty briefly before leaving out to California with David Crosby of the, I don't know if
The
Crosby
Byrds.
still, it would have been the Byrds at that point, and he digs what she's doing, and she leaves with him to California to become a Laurel Canyon hippie, and is signed to Reprise Records, where she releases her first album.
That's in 1968, I think.
That's in 1968 the album comes out. Song to a Seagull. As mentioned, she, put out a handful of records pretty quickly in that era. Ladies of the Canyon was one of the big breakthrough ones, and then Blue became like critically acclaimed masterpiece. And then that brings us to For the Roses, her fifth studio album, 1972, which, as we mentioned, it's kind of a breakup album a little bit. Or a few of the songs kind of reference James Taylor and their relationship, but it has also mentioned it covers a whole lot of ground and a whole lot of things. So Yeah, wow. And the players on this album are bonkers, as one might expect from, someone who just had a hit album. Graham Nash plays harmonica on a song, You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio. Steven Stills is credited with Rock and Roll Band.
So I don't know if that has something to do with like the guitar solo at the end of Blonde in the Bleachers or something.
Yeah,
I was trying to figure that out.
Yeah,
like,
I don't fully
what exactly,
understand.
Or is it just like a nod to him and the song had something to do with him inspiring it or something?
Well,
Who
he's
knows?
a credited player. He definitely played something on that song, but it's just credited as Rock and Roll Band.
Yeah, because during the fade out, there's some stuff going on, but yeah.
I'm guessing they were on drugs and thought when they were coming up with the credits and thought that would sound funny, some inside joke.
And now 50 years later, we're overthinking it. Yeah, Russ Kunkel on drums. That's always nice to have around.
Yeah, big name. Wilton Felder
From the Crusaders.
From the Crusaders on the bass. As was mentioned on the previous episode, Bobby Hall on percussion.
We did just talk about her on Coke Escovedo.
Yeah. Sean made a game where he wanted us to name percussionists, and I couldn't think of one off the top of my head, and I used my notes for this episode to come up with a single percussionist.
I had looked up Bobby's resume or album credits briefly before this, and she's like got an amazing roster of albums that she's on, but she's also just like one of the most I'd buy that for $1 adjacent studio musicians I've ever seen. There's like 15 plus artists we've covered before that she plays percussion on their record, and there's only one album to my knowledge that we've actually covered that she plays on previously. She's on one track on the Cheryl Lynn record, You're the One, from Cheryl Lynn's self-titled. But yeah, an amazing roster of albums that she's been on.
Far out. As was mentioned a couple times in this episode, Tom Scott is playing some woodwinds for this thing. Bobby Notkoff contributes strings. And then James Burton does guitar for Cold Blue, Steel, and Sweet Fire.
I mean, really, it's a pretty tight, small band for an album. For a solo artist using studio musicians. Because, I mean, for most of it, you have your 3-piece rhythm section and Tom Scott. And then Joni's doing the guitars and piano. Like other than, those cameos. And that's interesting to me. It very much functions in a full band unit, which I think also is moving away from the folk into the jazz end for her.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I also just want to point out that Bobby Notkoff, the violinist, had also recently played with Karen Dalton and Neil Young.
Oh, wow.
Oh, two of my favoritists.
Mm-hmm.
Right around the time of this release.
Well, he's on Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere in 69 and then In My Own Time in 71.
Wow.
Oof.
And also was a member of the Electric Flag before that.
Oh, that's sooner or later we'll probably do the A Long Time Coming album by the Electric Flag.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that's an easy one to find for sure.
I saw Buddy Miles live once. He wasn't doing well at the time.
Still, that's something.
It was something. He kept pointing a drumstick in the air and saying, "This is for Jimmy." I kid you not.
Whoa.
It was like, quit milking the band, man.
Whatever works.
Hey, just get that Electric Flag episode up.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's who played on this record. There's a whole, rest of Joni's career that we don't really have time to get into, that took some wild turns on a few occasions. Prepping for this, I somehow just started watching and almost watched all of a live performance of Joni with Pat Metheny, Jaco Pastorius, and Michael Brecker.
Oh, yeah.
And found myself really enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great players.
They are, but they're like names on. They're like people I generally can't get with, like Jocko.
Yeah.
I have a weird. I play bass and I hate Jocko kind of stripe. It's kind of like I don't know. It's kind of like being a punk and hating a hippie, right? There's no real reason I have this antipathy, but I have it. But when he's playing with Joni, like I was likening it to, it's like when Billie Holiday's with Lester Young. Like he's a singer and a musician that are so complementary to each other.
Mm.
And so that era of her career, I find super interesting, on multiple levels, including the sheer amount of cocaine they must all be doing at that point. But they seem to be having a really good time.
And she did an album with Charles Mingus.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mingus was in her touring band for a little while.
That's nuts.
Yeah, Mingus. I was told the story that Mingus like did not sing previous to that, and Joni Mitchell was just like, "Well, everybody in my band sings, so I hired you for my band. Therefore, you now sing."
Wow.
And
Damn.
he sang.
That's, and knowing some of the stories I know about Charles Mingus,
Right.
it's incredible that she told him how it was going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the other stories are about Charles Mingus intimidating the hell out of people.
Right. The Suge Knight of the jazz era.
Pretty much. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so super interesting character. Definitely read more about her. It's, yeah, I don't even know what to say because I'm confounded by it all. She I noticed in interviews, she really pushed against being identified with like the hippies and the 60s and talked about how like the free love thing was all bullshit and most of these hippies were just like virtue signaling and
Oh, she wasn't wrong.
yeah, and it was
Well, I
they're
think she
just-
really got burned by that scene in a lot of ways. I don't know. It's interesting. Like I think there was a Rolling Stone thing in the 70s that did kind of like an itemized list of like different musicians she had slept with or something like that. Like it was kind of portray, this kind of misogynist element to rock and to the hippie thing that I think she was very reacted against.
Yeah.
I mean, these two words, David Crosby. Think of hanging out with that motherfucker all day long for a few years, and you're not going to think kindly of hippies. R.I.P.
Yeah, there's that anecdote of about Terry Melcher, who was a producer who worked with the Beach Boys and the Byrds. He's the son of Doris Day. And of course, he later worked with Charles Manson some in a connection with Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys. And at some point, he got asked by an interviewer who the most objectionable character he had ever met through the music industry was, and he responded, "That would be David Crosby." And the interviewer was kind of like, maybe I should have asked that question. Well, who's the second most objectionable? Who's the second most objectionable person you've ever met? No problem there, Charles Manson.
Oh dear.
Woo.
Yeah, so just a little insight into how people thought of Crosby. Once again, R.I.P.
Take that however you want to. So, Bob, maybe you know this. Is this the only record where Joni shows her butt on the inside of the album?
I was gonna try to make like an OnlyFans joke, but I was slow on the uptick there. So I guess we'll just go with maybe.
I just remember like the first time pricing one of these records and like opening up and inspecting and be like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting that. Okay. Interesting choice, but still kind of a cool gatefold shot. She's like, looking out at the ocean and the whole like water view and everything. It's cool.
Maybe it's like, okay, well, they want my face on the cover. I'll put my ass on the inside.
Yeah. It's all a statement.
I was thinking maybe it was her Herbie Mann tribute.
Yeah. This one's for Herbie.
Yeah, so we're not going to get into the rest of it for now because we don't have time, but maybe we'll do a later Joni album later in the podcast. So for now, Sean, we turn to you. Oh, I guess I should mention Joni is still alive and just performed recently for the first time after she couldn't perform for about 7 years because she had a brain aneurysm and has been recovering from that for a while. And yeah, performed.
Just like Neil Young.
Did that happen to Neil Young?
I think Neil had an aneurysm too and then was out. He was talking about it on that Heart of Gold live DVD he did a few years back, if I remember correctly.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that at all. So yeah, Joni's out there and still performing. I watched the video of her doing Both Sides Now from that performance, and it's extremely potent still. But now is the time where we turn to Sean and say, Sean, I really liked this album. What are some other albums I should check out, Sean?
It's funny you should ask. I actually made a little list of 3 records. I mean, just for my own purposes, really, but I guess I could share it with you if you want.
I would appreciate you sharing this rare list of similar albums.
All right, cool. Well, I was thinking Ian Matthews, Tigers Will Survive, also from 1972, a previously featured artist who had a unique approach to folk music songwriting and is a guy you find in the dollar bins, highly underappreciated.
Yeah, he covered Joni's Woodstock on one of the early Matthews Southern Comfort records.
Yeah.
I feel like it would have been impossible to be a folk musician in the 70s and not be influenced by Joni Mitchell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's just got to be like one of the most common threads for that world of music. I mean, everybody loves Joni. Second recommendation, a previously featured album and one that is again a slightly non-traditional take on folk music, Chris Williamson, The Changer and the Changed.
Yeah, one of the Olivia records.
Yeah. Great episode, great album. Because we talked about that one last season.
And then my final recommendation, a person who, if I remember right, was not only influenced by Joni, but was a friend and collaborator, talking about Jimmy Spheris, and recommending his classic album, Isle of You, from 1971. Not the first recommendation, not the last. Our first episode.
Yeah, threw that in for Jeremy, because he loves when you recommend Jimmy Spheris.
Just for Jeremy.
Yeah, that's got to be like the 5th or 6th time at least.
Yeah, maybe even more. Now that I know that you're like counting, I'm going to do it more often.
Okay.
I hope that you understand that this is the reality you've brought upon yourself.
Yeah.
Ready?
Unfortunately, I only have 10 fingers and
Yeah, I'm going to run out pretty soon.
yeah, I'm not reaching down to my toes at my age.
You might hurt yourself. That'd be dangerous.
Yeah.
We need you in top physical condition. You have many more years of podcasting in front of you.
True.
Well, thank you, Sean. And Bob, it's now that time that we turn to you, put the spotlight on you, and ask if you have anything that you would like to plug for our listeners.
I'm going to be on tour in March with New Standards Men, a band out of Denver. They have an LP coming out, I think by the summer, that I play on.
Isn't our former guest Ike Turner also connected to that?
Ike played drums on the album, and he will be on this tour, and we will be playing in Kalamazoo, where a few of you may be.
Me and Peter.
You listen to this fine podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then I also played on an album with my friends Sam Lockward and Mike Watt that'll be coming out this summer. So I'm really excited and honored to be part of that as well.
Yeah.
And otherwise, just kind of throwing stuff out there with the label, trying to get people to hear people that make really cool, weird noises.
And where can people find your label releases and your own work as well?
Epic Games subsidiary, Bandcamp.com, is a very useful tool for me who is too lazy to register their own website. So you could look up personalarchives.bandcamp.com or bobbuckojr.bandcamp.com for my own wacky music.
Awesome.
And if you see that Bob Bucko and the New Standards Men are coming to a town near you, please go see them and mention the podcast. That would just be delightful. Tell them we sent you.
But whisper it. Sneak up behind him.
See, my plan's working already.
Yeah, you have to whisper it in his ear mid-set, though. That is the caveat.
Yeah.
Well, do we have any last thoughts on Joni Mitchell before we wrap up yet another episode of I'd Buy That for $1?
No, just get some headphones, bust out that lyric sheet or open up that gatefold, follow along with the lyrics, and really just let it in because it's just brilliant, frankly.
Yeah, I've found the more time I spend with this album, and I'm glad that we chose it because I purchased it a few years ago and listened to it a couple times, enjoyed it enough, but this prompted me to really focus on it. And yeah, there's a lot of little subtleties that come out of the arrangements and the songs the more you pay attention.
Yeah.
Well, very good. What are we leaving on? Is it the song we've mentioned several times, Blonde in the Bleachers?
It is a song which came back to my attention after having heard this record 1,000 times as like a toddler, when I had a 7-inch, a Lou Barlow solo 7-inch where he covered it when I was in high school. And that's what got me listening to Joni Mitchell again. So thanks, Lou Barlow.
Excellent.
He probably listens to the podcast, I would imagine, right?
Why wouldn't he?
Why wouldn't he?
He has to now. We mentioned him.
Yeah, I bet he's Googling his name right now to see where it shows up.
How many podcasts mentioned me this week?
That megalomaniacal bastard.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thanks for coming, Bob.
Oh, it's nice to talk to y'all again.
Aw. All right. I'm co-host Jeremy.
I'm co-host Peter.
I'm co-host Sean.
And I can never remember if I'm supposed to say something here or not, so I'm guest Bob.
Blonde in the bleachers, she flips her hair for you. Above the loudspeakers, you start to fall. She follows you home, but you miss living alone. You can still hear sweet mysteries calling you. The bands and the roadies, loving them and leaving them. It's pleasure to try them, it's trouble to keep them. 'Cause it seems like you've gotta give up such a piece of your soul when you give up the chase. Feeling it hard and cold, you're in rock and roll, it's the nature of the race. It's the unknown child, so sweet and wild, it's youth, it's too good to waste.